I've taught Portuguese for years and there are certain mistakes that beginners will make time and time again. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to help you fix the 10 mistakes that beginners always make so that you can speak better Portuguese with confidence. Welcome back to Talk the Streets, where I teach you practical Portuguese in plain English. If we haven't met, my name is Liz, and like you, I was a beginner learning Portuguese once. Now, after studying and teaching Portuguese for many years and living in Portugal myself for 7 years, I'm pretty well equipped to being your guide to speaking more like a local and less like a confused, cringing tourist. So if you are ready to learn what these 10 mistakes are so you'll never make them again, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get started. So the first thing is confusing genders. Now, all nouns in Portuguese have a gender. They can be either masculine or feminine. So for example, the glass is o copo, masculine, but the beer is a cerveja, feminine. The words o and a here are the word the in Portuguese, but more on that in a minute. Now, you might think, oh, that is simple. Words ending in O are the masculine and the words ending in A are feminine, but I'm afraid it's not that easy, if only. So you have words like o problema, so a word ending in A that's actually masculine. And then of course, lots of words that don't end in O or A. There are some tricks that you can use. For example, all words ending in são will be feminine. For example, estação. I do go into these tricks for learning the gender of objects in detail in my free lesson for beginners. It's a whole 60-minute workshop on pronunciation, basic grammar and real life practical Portuguese. So definitely sign up for that if you want to get deeper into this. But for now, my top tip for making sure that you are getting genders correct is using the app Lingui. Now, how do I suggest that you use this? Every time you're looking up a new word, a new noun like dog or ball, it's gonna come up with an M or an F next to the Portuguese word, and that's gonna tell you that it's masculine or feminine. So what I want you to do is, instead of just learning the word for ball, learn it with the article, the u or the a, okay? So it would be, for example, a bola. So if you learn it like this, as soon as you're learning a new word, learning the gender as well, it's going to become so much easier. So that brings me on to mistake number 2, forgetting to use the article, the definite article. Well, what is that, I hear you cry? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's the word the, which, as I told you in the last section, is either going to be u for masculine words or a for feminine words. Now, the tricky part is that places and even people need to have the definite article. For example, the city of Porto is o Porto, and the country Brazil is o Brasil. And if you are talking about a person, for example, if you're talking about Joanna, you would refer to her as a Joanna. And it doesn't stop there. If we're talking about things like things that belong to us, we would also need to use it there as well. We wouldn't just say my dog, meu cão. We actually have to say o meu cão. So it's really important to make sure that that really little word, u or a, is present where it needs to be. The third mistake I see people making a lot, still along the lines of gender, and one that I was super guilty of when I was learning, is not making sure that your sentences are agreeing according to gender. Again, what am I talking about? Well, other words in the sentence, not just the nouns, are going to change based on the gender of the noun. So let's take a noun, a dress, which is vestido. This is masculine. So the full sentence for a pretty dress will be vestido bonito. All three of these things need to agree with each other. They all need to be masculine because the word dress is masculine. But if we have a skirt, it will be uma saia bonita. And it doesn't stop there. Some other parts of the sentences, other bits of grammar, like words describing possession, as I already mentioned, need to agree in the gender too. So for example, if I wanted to say my dress, I'd say o meu vestido bonito. But my pretty skirt would be a minha saia bonita. See how important gender is. So take my advice from earlier and learn the gender of every noun as you are building up your vocabulary list. We do go into a lot of detail inside my Portuguese Pro program, which is my full online course and community for people who are relocating or retiring to Portugal and want to get to a conversational level fast. So if you do take my free class for beginners, which I mentioned before, is linked down in the description, you'll hear about how to join us. I'll link some testimonials from my current pro students in the description as well if you are curious to find out more. The next mistake is speaking Spanish. Now, I have done a couple of videos on that, so go and check out those for more detail because I go into the exact differences. But the headline is that you cannot just speak Spanish with a slightly different accent in Portugal and think that you'll get away with it. There are big differences in vocabulary and grammar, but the easiest trap to fall into is pronunciation. So let me tell you about closed versus open vowels. So in Spanish, we have a lot of open vowels where our mouth is more open. So in the sentence, for example, mi amiga Maria, I am saying open A's there. However, in Portuguese, we are going to close those A's down and we would say a minha amiga Maria. Can you hear the difference? Is a closed A and a is an open A, which is used a lot more in Spanish. So this is just one example of how the two are very, very different. But if you can learn to close down your vowels, you're going to sound so much more Portuguese and less Spanish. The other important thing to know is that Spanish is a syllable timed language. This means you're going to stress all the syllables in the sentence. Have you noticed that Spanish and other syllable timed languages like Italian sound like this? Da 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 da, because we are stressing all of the syllables. However, in Portuguese, it's a stress timed language. So rather than saying da 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 and stressing all of the syllables, we're only stressing them at regular intervals, and the syllables that aren't stressed get a little bit swallowed up. I have a whole video on that over here, but it's a really important thing to understand, so go and check out that video next for a fuller explanation. But it's another reason why these two languages are very similar but also very different. The next mistake is the pronunciation of the letter M. I cannot tell you how many students come to me in their first lesson and are pronouncing an M like a M when it comes at the end of a word. For example, bom dia. No. When an M is at the end of the word, it's actually telling us to nasalize the vowel that goes before it. So instead of bom dia, I need to say bon dia. Make that O a nasal on. Have you ever tried it? You need to screw up your nose a little bit and make sure that the air is coming out of your nose and your throat at the same time. On. That's the sound that we want to hear. And it goes for any other word ending in M. For example, origem or massagem. I'm making that E that comes at the end nice and nasal, and we're not saying a M at all. One of the tricks to make sure that you get this right is to not fully close your mouth at the end. Massagem. You see how my lips stay apart? If I close them, we're going to hear a bit of that M or N sound, which is what we don't want. So have a practice. I do also have a full pronunciation guide with accompanying audio that talks you through 7 of the most difficult sounds in Portuguese. It's also linked in the description if you want to check that out as well. Next up is misplaced stress. Getting stress and intonation right is a really important part of having a good accent when you speak Portuguese, and it's one of the reasons people really stand out as beginners if they're placing the stress in the wrong place. Now, I did do a whole video on this, which you can check out next. I'll link it in the description. But what you really want to think about are 2 things. Number 1, does the word have an accent? If so, that is where the stress should go no matter what. So let's look at these 2 words that look very, very similar, but one has an accent and the other one doesn't. It's the words esta and está. In the second one, there is an accent on the A, so that tells me that that is where the stress needs to go, and it differentiates it from the other word. Esta means this when you're talking about a feminine noun, and está means it is. It's a conjugation of the verb estar, meaning to be. So you can see it's very important to look out for those accents and put the stress in the right place, because we need to get the right word. The second question you need to ask, if there is no accent in the word, is which is the penultimate Syllable, that means the second to last. So you're going to have to break the word down into syllables, count backwards from the end, that's the last one. This is the one before the last, that's the penultimate one. So if you take the word viagem, you can see that the stress goes on that middle syllable because it's the penultimate one. Usually my students, because they're concentrating so hard on getting that nasal sound right at the end that we talked about earlier, they'll put the stress there at the end as well. And that's not where it should go. Why? Because the word has no accent, so it has to be that penultimate syllable rule. And this is going to help you pronounce any word in Portuguese. The next mistake is confusing the verbs to be. To make life complicated, there are two verbs to be in Portuguese, and I'm not going to get into it in a lot of detail because it is really tricky. It's actually a whole lesson inside my Portuguese program, but I want to give you a couple of tips. Anything that is changeable is going to be estar, so your mood, estou feliz, the weather, está frio, but also the location of something that can move, like your wallet. A minha carteira está na sala. Or yourself. Estou na escola. Anything that cannot change is going to be ser. So, your nationality. Sou inglesa. Your personality. Sou tímida. Or the location of a building or a country. Remember, they can't move. So, o banco é ao lado do supermercado. There are some tricky ones that you just need to memorize, like your profession. Even though it can change, we will always use ser. So, sou professora. And the time is also ser, and that definitely changes. So the simplest way to tackle this is to listen to the question you are being asked, because you are always going to repeat back the verb that was in the question. So regarding the time, which is a tricky one to remember, whether it's ser or estar, the question is, que horas são? São comes from the verb ser, so that is the verb that should be in my answer. São 2 horas da tarde. The next mistake is using the word você. Now, being polite is something that will be very important when you are visiting Portugal, but what you may not realise is that the pronoun for you, polite, is not actually commonly used in Portugal. And this is another big difference with Spanish and also a big difference with Brazilian Portuguese. There's more on that in this video here. I'll link it in the description so you can watch it next. So in that video, I explained that unlike in Spain, where the use of usted, which is the pronoun for you, polite, is used all the time, and in Brazil, where they will use você to simply mean you, doesn't matter who you are talking to. I explained that here in Portugal, we don't actually do it like that. So actually the easiest way around this is to drop off the pronoun completely and just use the verb instead. So what do I mean? Instead of saying você fala inglês, I'll just chop off the você and say fala inglês. Number 9 is another pronunciation mistake, and to be honest, it's probably the most common among native English speakers, and those are usually the people that I am teaching, so I see this one a lot. And it's a pronunciation of the single R in Portuguese. Now, of course, all verbs will end in an R when they're in the infinitive form. For example, the word falar. Now you can notice there that I am not saying a R sound like I usually would in English. It's not falar, okay? It's falar, which is a tap on the roof of your mouth with your tongue. So that's why we call this the tapped R, and it's a really tricky one, especially for English speakers to actually make with their mouth, which is why this is a mistake that I see time and time again. Again, I do have a full video on pronunciation mistakes, particularly that native English speakers make, so you might want to watch that next. And finally, this one is a little bit more general, but another mistake I see beginners making time and time again is using apps and thinking that that's what's going to teach you Portuguese. Yes, I have done so many videos on apps telling you which are the best ones to use right now, but here's the very important distinction that I want you to know. I think that these should be used as a supplement to your learning, not the whole of your learning, okay? So you really want to be doing some kind of structured course or program and using the apps to practice and supplement what you are learning. If you're just using an app and thinking that that's what's going to teach you the language, you're going to have so many holes in your knowledge, because really all they're teaching you to do is memorize vocabulary. And as you'll probably know, if you've been trying to do this, that's not sufficient motivation to actually string a sentence together. So I want you to think about that. If you are currently using an app and feeling like it's not taking you far enough, this is the reason why, and I highly encourage you to find something that is more comprehensive and more in-depth. So there you have it, the 10 mistakes that pretty much every beginner makes. So now hopefully you will not fall into these traps. If you enjoyed this video and you do want to go deeper and you even want to find out more about learning with me, then please go into the description and register for my free workshop for beginners. It's the best 60 minutes that you will spend learning Portuguese, I promise you, and you'll find all the information about how to join the Portuguese Pro program. I'll be back next week with more tips and tutorials to improve your confidence and conversation skills in Portuguese, so make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss a thing. Ciao for now.